Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and I remember growing up watching news reports of human suffering going on in various countries around the world, whether it be due to natural disasters, such as in Ethiopia, or callous government, such as in North Korea. There was always a sympathy for the people there, but an otherworldliness about it as well, as if you couldn't quite connect, because it was so far removed from the reality of where we were living in the UK. Even in a poor town like Doncaster, where I grew up, yes, there was poverty. You saw it all around. Life was a struggle for a great many people, and an unfair one at that in many cases. There were people who worked very, very hard to scrape a living. But it was still very far removed from the desperate situations that we saw on news reports around the world. Well, no more. We now have bodies such as the UN and most recently Human Rights Watch writing reports of this nature about the UK, about the plight of the disinfected in this country. We're now one of those countries whose population is being described as cruelly treated by callous government. It certainly wasn't a natural disaster. One especially damning statement from the report by Human Rights Watch is, the way the UK government has handled its reduction in welfare spending has left parents unable to feed their children in the fifth largest economy in the world. Now, the UK government has been systematically cutting funding across the board, including on social care, healthcare, education and policing, to name just a few that have hit the poorest the hardest. They haven't been making cuts because they think the provision isn't needed. They've done it because they think others will pick up the slack. This was the plan. The idea of allowing charities just to take over government responsibilities began in the current government with David Cameron's Big Society idea. That's what he called it. It was all part of a deliberate plan to remove government support based on an ideology that they believe means that society simply fills in the gaps that government leaves. It even introduced a form of legal slave labour that still persists today. Some companies refused to take part when they were hit with very negative media backlash, but others were keen enough regardless. But society can't just pick up all the slack. It's tried, but only government has the overview and funding to really run a society, a complex society like a whole nation. That's why we have governments, to keep large, complex societies operating. Last week, for example, I saw a report about a school in Norfolk arranging their own food bank. It started when the head teacher received a note from a pupil saying that their mother had run out of food. The head teacher visited the child's home and found, yes, actually, there is no food in this house. Investigating the full extent of the problem amongst families of other children attending, and she was pretty shocked, and there's now a food bank at that school. There's also a clothes washing service for those who can't afford it, and the librarian is even cutting hair for children who can't otherwise afford to get it done properly. A librarian, by the way, whose dedication and desire to go above and beyond isn't saving them from potential redundancy. As the budgets continue to be cut in schools, the head teacher is going to have to lose even more staff in the coming year. And there's that unfairness to it again. The Conservatives keep saying things like, oh, the route to success is hard work. This idea that if you work hard, you will make it. No. There's a value member of school staff doing extra work above and beyond the course of duty, and their low-income job is at risk. That work's not secure. Where's the fairness in that? And on the issue of child poverty, I can say that I as a teacher get annual training now on spotting the signs of poverty and how it can affect a student's ability to study. We need this training. It's absolutely vital to be sensitive to their situation and not to mistake hardship for laziness. Well, this training was certainly not high on the agenda during my earlier career. It's something that has risen since 2010 and has become, every year it just becomes more and more of an important thing that we have to be taken through. And when you start to look at the running of a country through the lens of an ideology that believes that government doesn't really have a role to play in social care, healthcare or education, then you suddenly see how all the devastation to those services occurred. It wasn't just incompetence, though there's plenty of that on show, but it's essentially deliberate. And people are voting for this ideology as well. Look at any report or article on suffering in this country related to a public service, and you can see it's the inevitable result of that same ideology. It's not because, oh, there isn't enough money there. It's because they're deliberately pulling those services away because they think if they pull them away, someone else will just put them on. Someone else will pay for it. The universal credit issue, for example, is often linked to incompetence or the inefficiency of a new system that just people haven't got to grips with yet. But the reality is that it was always a mechanism to kick people off benefits to make the unemployment figures look better, as well as reduce the overall tax bill. This is how the government gets to claim that unemployment is the best for generations in a stagnant economy. It isn't. They fiddle the figures. And that ideology is at play here as well. Universal credit isn't failing. It's doing exactly what they want it to do. They think that if people lose their benefits, then either the idle beggars will all of a sudden find work, who'd have thunk it, or that their local community will help them out. Now, sometimes it does, and sometimes people die, like this man who was denied benefits because he was told he was fit to work. Not only did 2 doctors make it very clear that he was not, but, well, look at him. Does he look like he's fit to work? And now he's dead because he discharged himself from hospital because he was told that he had a benefits hearing, and if he didn't attend it, that would be it. No more appeals. So against the strongest medical advice, he discharged himself from hospital. Frankly, the person responsible for that should be charged for manslaughter. But it's all born of a cruel political ideology, and it is cruel, not just thoughtless. Thoughtlessness might put something like this in place because you didn't think about it. And then when they see the devastating consequences, well, then you change it. To proceed even when the consequences are clear and terrible can be nothing other than deliberately cruel. And it's thinking that the Conservatives have had for like 2 centuries now or more of small government. That's their mantra, small government, laissez-faire. Because a country will essentially sort itself out. And that leaches into everything they're supposed to be doing. Another recent report said that the government are taking advantage of the goodwill of nurses, piling more work onto the few remaining ones as desperate shortages get worse and worse, despite the lies about more funding from the Prime Minister. The same could also be said of cuts to other services, with more work being required of fewer police and fewer teachers. I can certainly say that as a teacher I have much more contact teaching time now, which all needs preparing, than 10 years ago. Now, if I was a new teacher, thinking back to when I was a new teacher and the massive workload there was when you haven't really built up a portfolio, I can't even imagine doing that these days. Lots more students per teachers as well also means less time spent per student. A little bit of maths there for the privately educated monkeys in Parliament. On one level, I could say that it's now embarrassing that we are one of those countries that we're used to seeing on the news where corrupt government has led to populations being destitute within their own nations. And we're not talking about the idea of people becoming destitute because of a harsh change in circumstances in their life and they somehow slip through the cracks in government support. The sheer number of citizens suffering from this shows it's a gaping chasm, not cracks. We're not talking about hundreds of people, we're not even talking about thousands, but millions struggling to feed themselves in one of the wealthiest nations on earth. But the problem is that the people suffering from this shame of the problem helps keep it hidden from wider society as if it's somehow their fault. And if people were more open about it, it would be undeniable because everyone would know people who are suffering like this. But on a deeper level, you know, it's not just embarrassing. These are my countrymen and countrywomen who are being starved and degraded. And for what? Because we're a poor country that can't afford to feed our own? No, because we're a greedy nation and that gives our wealth to the already extremely wealthy. The Conservative Party have always been about small government. They seem to hold the view that a country doesn't need a government, that anything that they withdraw will just sort itself out. And as I say, sometimes it does, but at a cost. Often it doesn't, at a greater cost. But the wealthy elite who control the Conservatives don't care about that. They don't care if poverty leads to poor nutrition, even though that would create greater stress on the NHS because, well, they're moving to a future where public healthcare won't exist. They don't care that whilst we still have the NHS, medical staff are overworked and treatment failure rates will increase because, well, they pay for private healthcare. In fact, as was noted recently, some of those wealthy elite would actually make money from private healthcare being the only form of healthcare in the UK, such as Arron Banks, for example. That's one of the ways they make their money. They don't care about shortages in police because they have private securities keeping themselves and their properties safe. They don't care that overloading teachers and cramming classrooms can mean educational opportunities for many kids is missed because, well, they educate their own children privately in nice small classes, gives them a bigger advantage against those who didn't have such a good education as well. And when it comes to employees that they need to drive their wealth, well, they like them a bit dim, stops them asking awkward questions. And if they develop an industry that needs well-educated employees, well, and they try and attract them from overseas. But okay, well, as a result of Brexit, for example, they may not be able to. No problem, they'll just move operations abroad like James Dyson did. And they genuinely see taxation as a form of theft because they largely pay for private versions of public services. And that's what we've got to bear in mind. It's not just people penny pinching, trying to pay less tax. There's an element of that. But it's not just greed. They genuinely see taxation as a form of theft on them. Why should they have to pay tax? Much less more than others. Because they pay for their own stuff, they argue. But what they fail to take into account is that were they not part of a large society, they wouldn't have that wealth at all. Their life of luxury isn't the result of their hard work, even though some undoubtedly do work hard, but because they are the top of a very large pyramid. But they're taking that pyramid for granted, and it may one day wake up to realise the real cause of the desperate situation, which is not the EU, or even the UK government, really. It's them. So anyway, hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe for further content, and until next time, I'll see you later.